They may have diversified now, where for some reason they're no longer able to reproduce, Great Dane and a Chihuahua. Well, technically they can, have a few mechanical problems, but the biblical created kinds were those that were capable of reproducing a viable offspring, which was also capable of reproducing. So that would be a good definition of kind, at least the best I come up with for the moment.
This is quite an amazing thing, because these people who call themselves creation scientists have this idea of a kind, and they have no idea what it means. You know, you just can't pin them down. I gave you a good definition for what a species is. It's a group of creatures that can interbreed, a group of animals or plants that can productively interbreed, and that's the definition of a species. That's a well-defined concept. There are some difficulties when you have transitions taking place, like the two gulls. But let me give my best evidence for this idea. Dr. Hoven's been talking about what? Dogs and bananas? Well, let's talk about dogs and peas, because I don't happen to have any knowledge of data on bananas, but I think if you can show it for peas, you can show it for bananas. And by the way, I haven't studied evolution for 28 years. I've studied biochemistry. But one of the things I have studied for almost 28 years is proteins that are in chromosomes called histones. And there's one of those called histone H3. There's 5 of them, 5 main classes altogether, but there's one called histone H3 that is very conserved in evolution. The explanation for this is that it has so many functions, so many parts of the protein. When the protein first originated, probably in the first nucleated cell, when that first happened, it had so many functions that no part of it could change. And so it has stayed the same. There's only one difference between mammals and peas. Now, you could say that's due to the same designer. I say it's due to common ancestry way back in the very first nucleated cell, the eukaryotic cell. How can we test which of those is true? Well, the DNA that encodes that protein can change, because the genetic code that goes from a DNA to a protein there's several different DNAs that can encode the same protein. So evolution would predict that if you looked at the DNA, even though all organisms, from plants to mammals and everything in between, has almost identical histone H3, you would predict that when you look at the DNA and the similarities in the genes of the histone H3 gene, you would come up with a family tree like the ones I showed you before, and that is what we find. If those were all created, you would predict that one of two things should happen. Either the creator would, if the proteins are all the same, why wouldn't the creator make all the DNAs the same? Well, might just choose the codons from the genetic code to use at random, and then there would be no relationship between the DNAs at all. Or they might be chosen so that the same DNA was used in all cases. But you certainly would not predict the pattern that's actually seen. And that, to me, I mean, I never formally studied evolution, but I started out as a biochemist and learning about these proteins. And that sort of thing, to me, is so convincing of common ancestry that it wouldn't matter if there were fossils or not.
Okay, Dr. Paulson.
Okay.
We just got 5 minutes left, and that would give your opportunity for a question to Dr. Hoven.
Okay, I guess I'd like to pin Dr. Hoven down one more time on the idea of what predictions his hypothesis makes. And I'd like him to share with us one prediction that the hypothesis of creation makes, hypothesis of creationism 6,000 years ago and all that. one prediction that would distinguish it from evolution, one case where it makes a different prediction, and secondly, a prediction by which it could conceivably be falsified.
Well, you kind of did what that other guy did. You asked about 5 questions. Just give me one. Narrow that down to one for me. Can you try one more time? Because I only got 5 minutes to answer this. Pick one. Which one do you like the worst?
Just show me a prediction that distinguishes creationism from evolution.
Creation predicts that animals will bring forth after their kind. And if you look around the world in all the breeding experiments and accidents, that's all we're seeing, is they're bringing forth after their kind. I gave you my predictions. There's going to be animals that produce after their kind and plants that produce after their kind. There will be no intermediates between basic kinds. I gave you a definition of kind, capable of reproducing. Your definition of species was interesting, that is similar to my definition of kind, animals capable of reproducing, and yet a dog and a wolf are different species. But they can interbreed, you know, so you don't have a good definition of species, I don't think either. And again, we're arguing back to between micro and macro. Where's the border line? That's what the whole argument is about here. Where's the line between micro and macroevolution? I don't know exactly the definition of all the kinds, but I think the vast majority are pretty obvious, and a 3-year-old can tell you that a banana and a dog are a different kind of animal. So my prediction would be that animals would only be observed to bring forth after their kind, and that fossils we would find would be similar to living fossils today, living animals today, or plants, and that there will be no evidence whatsoever in the living world or in the dead world of anything in between basic kinds of animals. That's what I predict based upon the creation model, and we have yet to see any evidence to the contrary of that. I predict, for one thing, fossils don't form very readily. Millions of buffalo were slaughtered out west in the last few hundred years. I defy you to go find one fossilized buffalo. The existence of fossils, period, is very good evidence of a flood. Soft-bodied animals like worms and jellyfish are found fossilized. Had to be buried instantly. They'd have been decayed or scavenged in a few, in a few moments down in the ocean, in the real world. So the existence of fossils in twisted, contorted positions and disarticulated fossils where they rotted for a few months and then were finally buried in giant piles of bones. We covered that in video number 6 of my series about all the fossil graveyards, are such powerful proof for a flood. So I gave you my predictions that we'll find animals that only produce after their kind in the living, and we won't find fossils of anything in between. And we'll find zillions of fossils buried in the ground. As far as something that would falsify that, well, then the opposite. If we don't find any fossils buried in the ground, then probably that's good evidence there wasn't a flood. If we find animals regularly producing different kinds other than themselves, wildly different kinds, that are also capable of reproducing, that would be good evidence. That would falsify the creation theory. And yet I'd like to see those. There is none of that. There's no evidence for that.
All right, if each of you would like to make a closing statement, a brief closing statement on your behalf, we would take those now.
How long will that be? 2 minutes?
We won't time you if it's
Long as you
keep
want.
it somewhat brief.
Well, in that case, I'm glad I'm going first. Well, I would just like to reply to the question, the answer, rather, to my question that Dr. Hovind just gave. I understood him to say that his hypothesis of creationism predicts